I have a question from Lawrence. I've been reading a lot about various approaches to parts therapy. I'm not sure if Erickson had used or written about that besides his conscious unconscious approach. Okay, I think I had another question, I think maybe from Camille again, I think about, or maybe Caroline, I don't know, about parts and Erickson. Well, as far as I know, I don't think Erickson actually used parts therapy, parts work in the way it's structured like in NLP. Because NLP, of course, has done an amazing job of taking the skills of various therapists and people like Bateson and Pearls and Satir and Erickson, for example, to a lesser extent, Frank Farrelly, and modeling what works. And really, I think they got their concept of parts work from Virginia Satir, not Erickson. However, Erickson would still work with the unconscious and would delegate tasks or give positive hypnotic suggestions to the unconscious, to different parts of the unconscious. But it wasn't clearly defined as it is in NLP in the way they teach it with, like, for example, 6-step reframing technique, if you're familiar with that in NLP. It was more, Erickson really didn't use techniques. If you went through his work, you could probably pull them all out and have like bullet headings and step by step by step and create them. In fact, Tad James did this with timeline therapy. He looked at Erickson's work and he found that Erickson was working with screens, like movie screens or crystal balls, and going back and forwards in time and playing around with this. And he created timeline therapy from that. Or at least he claims that is the case. He actually acknowledged Erickson in his book, the first book on timeline therapy. So I'm assuming that's what he did because he's acknowledging it in the book. Parts work, I think that Bandler Grinder took that from Virginia Satir. So do I use it, for example? Well, no, I don't use it in the same sense, not really. I mean, I've taught it and I do teach it sometimes, but I don't personally use it in the same way that NLP uses it, simply because I don't like working with fixed structures. I like working with the principles behind techniques. So if you take, the 6-step reframe as a technique with a series of steps that you follow, you learn it and then follow it, it's a bit clinical for me. I prefer to look at what's working, what's happening behind the scenes with this. What are the principles that make this work? Take those principles and then create something that's meaningful for the client, maybe based on an interest they have, or maybe based on part of their life, that things they've been doing in their life. So I will take the idea. I mean, you talk about parts, we could talk about clouds, different kinds of clouds in the sky, and we could do therapy like that, for example. You talk about pebbles, and you can pick up different pebbles. They all have a different quality, representing different things. You could even have people representing parts, which is actually how Virginia Satir used to do it. I trained with Virginia Satir, and I'm so grateful that I had the chance to do that while she was still alive. And she would use people as parts of a problem. So, you're not limited if you work from the principles up rather than the technique, which actually just locks you into a fixed way of working. You develop more flexibility, more creativity. And I do believe that Bandler and Grinder would have loved for people to not just follow those steps all the time. They'd love people to play with it, because all those early sessions they did, those early teachings they did, was all about experimenting, and playing with these ideas, not sticking to something so rigid as it's taught pretty much everywhere. So I think, look at NLP and look at everything to do with being a psychotherapist and being a hypnotherapist and studying Erickson and whoever else, and think, okay, what are the principles behind what's happening here? And then be creative with it and play with it. So that's my answer to you, Lawrence, about parts.